There is a mystery that's been hidden in the foundation of America from its very beginning, from its very first day as a nation. And it's a biblical mystery that has to do with dedication, consecration, and judgment. 3,000 years ago, Israel dedicated its temple and its future to God. And it happened on the Temple Mount. King Solomon gathered the nation together, the leaders together, and it was a day of prayer, a day of consecration. The king spoke of God's hand on the nation, his providence on the nation, and he looked to the future. He looked to the days when the nation would turn away from God and deal with judgment. And he prayed for mercy for the nation for that time. The nation of Israel did turn away from God, and judgment would come. And the final ultimate sign of judgment was when the calamity, the destruction, touched that Temple Mount, that same place where the nation had been consecrated, the nation's consecration ground, its ground of prayer and its ground of dedication. And so this was the sign of judgment. So here's a principle. In the days of judgment, the calamity or the destruction touches the nation's ground of consecration. The nation's ground of dedication to God becomes its ground of judgment. And so this is a mystery of return, of returning back. God was calling Israel back to him and saying, remember the place from which you have fallen. I'm calling you back to prayer and to seek my face, that I might have mercy on you. Now, America is similar to Israel, was also founded on God's word. In fact, America was founded originally by the Puritans to be a second Israel. Was there a day that corresponds to this day of dedication in America's history? There was, America's inaugural day. It wasn't 1776. It was 1789, April 30th, was the first day that America existed as we know it today, as a fully constituted nation with a president presiding over a government. April 30th, 1789 was the inauguration of America's first president, George Washington. And that day was also a day of dedication, a day that the nation and its leaders gathered together in the nation's capital city, a day of prayer. As Solomon spoke of God's providence, so Washington spoke of God's providence. And as Solomon spoke of the future generations that would turn away from God, so Washington gave a prophetic warning. In that day, that first day of America as a nation, there is hidden, or there is embedded, a prophetic message, a warning, in the first address of America's first president on the first day. And he said, in effect, he spoke of the smiles of heaven. But what he said, in effect, is if America ever turns away from God and from his ways, God would remove his blessings from the land. And that is coming true in our day. One of the blessings that Washington would speak about or pray about was the blessing of his, he called it his holy protection. He keeps America in holy protection. We are witnessing these blessings being removed. But that wasn't all. That day, as the day of dedication is a day of prayer, the first act of the American government together was not to pass a law or debate, it was to pray, to gather in prayer, and to consecrate the nation's future to God. So after that presidential address, Washington leads America's first government, its first House of Representatives, its first Senate, its first cabinet, on a procession on foot to the ground that will become America's consecration ground, the place where they will pray. Where is it? Because this is key. Where was America dedicated to God on its first day as a nation? America's first capital wasn't Washington, D.C., it wasn't Philadelphia, it was New York City. Specifically, it was Lower Manhattan. And specifically, they did this. The ground of consecration was a little stone chapel called St. Paul's Chapel. Still stands today. Where is it located? It stands at Ground Zero. America was dedicated to God on the corner of Ground Zero. In fact, it goes even farther than that. Ground Zero was actually owned by the church. It was church land. So America's consecration ground is Ground Zero. When judgment comes, it returns to the nation's ground of consecration. And so Ground Zero is America's mystery ground. America dedicated on its first day to God right there at the corner of Ground Zero. The nation's entire government there praying before God for the future, for now, at Ground Zero. And there was a tree that grew on that ground, on America's ground of consecration. And that tree was the sycamore. The sycamore, the harbinger, the sycamore that was struck down grew on the nation's consecration ground, the ground of judgment. And the Erez tree, the tree that replaced the sycamore, it all happened at St. Paul's, the nation's ground of consecration. And that's the same day that links the nation back to the warning that the first president ever gave America, that if it departed from God's ways, its blessings would be removed. And on that day, when 9/11 came, when Ground Zero was struck, a shockwave went forth from Ground Zero, and it struck Federal Hall, the place where Washington gave the warning that the nation's blessings would be removed. And it struck the foundation of Federal Hall, and it cracked it. And of all the buildings that surrounded Ground Zero, only one survived with virtually no damage. What building? It was the chapel, the little stone chapel where America was dedicated to God, where its future was committed to God. Why was it protected? They say it was because of a sycamore that was struck down that actually shielded the chapel. Which says something. The harbingers are not ultimately to bring judgment. They're a sign of judgment, but their purpose is to bring salvation, to bring redemption, to bring turning, to bring revival. So all this speaks of something. This is the mystery of return. God is calling a nation back, as he did Israel. He's calling America back to return. He says, his voice cries out from Ground Zero to say, return, do not be destroyed, do not perish, return and be saved.